You're listening to Life Check Yourself with life coach, transformational leader, and dating and relationship badass, Marni Battista. Every week, you'll get the raw truth from top experts and real people on the important life and love issues you want to know about. So if you're ready to life check yourself in your relationships, your career, and the areas of your life that matter most to you, and you're not afraid to be called out on your stuff, then you're ready for what's next.
Life Check Yourself with Christina McMahon. Instant Calm. How to reset your nervous system in 30 seconds.
Ladies, welcome to another fantastical episode of Life Check Yourself. I'm a believer in the universe conspiring for me, for you. And so my guest today came into my awareness through my daughter's friend. When you hear this story, you're going to be like, wow. See, things are happening for you that you don't even know about. And if you can just be in the process and allow it to unfold, this is where the magic happens. And this episode is an example of that. So welcome, Christina McMahon. She's a PhD. She's a love coach. She's a certified somatic counselor. She was recently featured in Cosmo Magazine, which is super cool. And over the last 7 years, she's helped hundreds of conscious singles remove their inner barriers to love and step into a life that they love with love, lots of love. She's also on the app Insight Meditation, which is so cool. And you can hear her meditations and audio courses there. She does one-on-one video love coaching. She's got a program called Open to Sacred Love. She spoke at the Mindfulness Expo in Anaheim, which is so cool. And she does all this work with her husband and partner, Darren Cagle, who's an LMFT, aka therapist. We're going to talk about so many things today, but the thing that I want to start with, which is part of your journey, because so many of our listeners, Christina, are doing the thing they thought they were going to do for their life. They worked their ass off to get there. And they're sort of wondering oh crap, is this all there is? And I've worked with a ton of academics, and I know becoming a tenured PhD is not something that you just casually do. So just first, let's just talk about that part of your journey. What was it like? You get tenure. We met through Gemma, who was a student in one of your classes.
Star student.
Yeah, right. She was a student. So what was it like? Did that feeling come on strong? Was it subtle? Did it hit you over the side of the head? Tell me what happened for you.
Hit me over the side of my head.
Oh gosh.
Sure.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And then after it hit me over the side of my head, then it was still a process of 10 years sort of unwinding from that career path. Because I know, and you've had some life shifts yourself, that's why you're interested in this topic, but it often takes time to really get an alignment of what our next path is. So, people look at me like I'm crazy when I said I was leaving this, it's tensioned, it was tenured, it was secure. And, I was on my love journey then, and I would go out with men. And if I would reveal that this was something that I thought was in my stars, that I was going to, leave the path of academia, so that was sort of my filter. If they could get on board with that and be excited, then I was oh, this is cool. Darren really was. He's I love that you're following your passion. But if they're are you sure you want to do that? Then
you're no, not for me. Okay, so describe the hit on the head.
Okay.
Were you in the middle of a lecture and all of a sudden you heard your voice sounding like Charlie Brown's teacher, wah, wah, wah. What happened?
Okay, I wish, Marni, it happened like many hard changes in life. It came through a breakdown. And I firmly believe, and I did not make up this phrase, but breakdown as the pathway to breakthrough.
Yeah.
So it actually came out of trauma. I won't go, into the details, but it was worst day of my life, but also most pivotal day of my life because it put me ultimately on a different path. But when I was an academic and Gemma was in my African and Caribbean theater class, that's how different my life was.
African and Caribbean theater. First of all, those classes were not options when I went to college in the 80s. Let's just say that. So how fun, but carry on.
That is cool. Yes, at UCSB. And actually it was it fulfilled one of their core curriculum requirements on global, cultures. So yeah, it was awesome. And Gemma was always like in, the front or, first or second row. Anyway, these classes are like 200 students, but this is what I did my doctoral dissertation research in. I would do field work. I did long time field work on the Cape Verde Islands in West Africa. Loved living there, loved that place, loved that culture. And then later when I was working on my academic book, I was adding in some comparative research sites. So I was working in a different country in Africa that was newer to me. So wasn't as familiar. It was a much bigger country, bigger city. I didn't have the same kind of support system that I had, in Cape Verde. So it was my second summer there. And I had this incident of trauma, which could have been life-threatening. Luckily, it wasn't. I was physically unharmed. It was all crime-related. And, I get it. Like these countries, like their economies have just been through the ringer, from like colonialism. And I was like teaching all this. So, of course, it's going to be more crime-ridden. Like, I get it, But in the moment when it's like your life that's being threatened, obviously, like that was extremely jarring. So, and this is like hard to believe, but I was in this traumatic situation for about an hour or two. And in that second hour, I was pretty much like, okay, I think I'm going to pull through this. Like, I think like, this person is not after my life. Like it's just theft, theft related. So actually in the moment of trauma, that is when I started questioning. And it sounds crazy, like, because you're like really in fight or flight, right?
Right.
So, but I was really like, why am I doing this? Like, is this really the life that I want for myself, to be traveling to all these different countries, like, and, in academia, it's very intense, the publish or perish thing, and like climbing that success ladder. My whole focus was like shooting to the top of my field. I already got the highest degree in my field,
Right.
PhD. And I was like, write the book, get tenure, keep climbing. But in that moment, I was like, do I really want this? And whose life am I leading, actually? And of course, the answer was my dad's, because like,
Well, let's put it. Yeah, let's go. Let's do that. Let's talk about all. There's a lot to unpack, as they say.
Right.
So I think it's really interesting that you said, like, when you're in the moment, like you have this, like, it's like a truth telling moment,
Yeah, good way.
And I think about, it's interesting. If I think about my own journey, it was when my dad was dying. He was like my best friend. My mom had already passed away. And, here I am in my grief. And my dad's there mumbling about his credit cards, and there's this part of my brain that goes, oh God, like, is this really what it's all about? Like at the end, like, is this how I want to be? Like, like my value of my life is the sum total of assets and liabilities. Right. And it was weird because I was like grieving and dealing with all this stuff and making like end of life decisions. But that part of my brain was like, hello, I have a little message for you. And I remember being like, okay, never mind, we'll deal with you later, blah, but like the seed has been planted. So now so we're going to continue your story, but you are an expert in somatics. So when you're in those moments where you're like having a breakdown or a big challenge, what is going on in your bodies? And explain a little bit about somatics and how is your body like ahead of the curve giving you like information?
Okay, Marni, that is such a great question. And like, actually, no one has ever asked me that, to like think about my traumatic situation from this point of view of like what was happening. So yeah, I actually went into freeze for that trauma, and later working with somatic healers and energy healers, because I was not on that path.
You were like an academic.
I was just in my head, not in my body.
If you don't know, so for those of you that don't know what that means, like I said, I've worked with a lot of academics.
Yeah.
Life is pretty much lived from like the bottom of your chin to the highest point in your hair.
Yes, so true. So true.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
There's irony in this, because I was actually a performance scholar. I was teaching theater. So my writing was all about the empowerment of the body and and motion and how bodies carry histories. But I wasn't living my life that way. You're right. I was like totally in my head. So in that moment, I wanted to freeze. And later, somatic healers would say that was actually a brilliant move, like that your body made, your body kept you alive. Like I just went into this, like, what do I need to say to keep me alive, right? So I said all those things, and later, they're like, you need to be proud of that. So that was my body's response in the moment. Later on, when I started to realize that like this life path wasn't for me anymore, in academia, it was just a lot of like tightness, tightness in my body, tightness in my jaw. And interestingly enough, that would also happen on dates when I was like on dates with people that my body felt, wasn't right for me, so I started to really be able to listen to what was going on, like tightness in my belly, like my gut talks a lot. I think for all of us, like this is like our truth telling place, when something's not feeling right down there, that's where that expression gut feeling comes from. And so I just started taking small steps in the direction of what felt good to me. Right. So that obviously that was like a lot of therapy to heal. Right. And on that path, learning meditation, because I was like, I need to stay more present in the moment. Right. Because I wanted to keep myself safe. I thought if I had been more aware in that moment, I could have kept myself safe. But also in that moment of trauma, I had no spiritual path. Like I was raised Catholic, but I had long sort of, abandoned the faith because I didn't want the dogma. I had no one to like call out to, reach out to. And I didn't feel in that moment that I could all of a sudden like pretend that, I had this connection to the divine. So, but later when I started to heal, it's like, I need to bring that back in my own way, because sometimes it's like just too hard to be alone in some situations. So, starting the path to learning meditation, I started learning energy healing. I don't know where that one came from, but it was like, no, you're supposed to become a healer yourself. So for a while, I was living this like dual life of like, I was tenured by that point, finished the book, teaching my classes. But, after tenure, you can kind of opt out a little of like doing the research if you don't care about advancing more on the ladder to academia. And I just decided I'm going to opt out of like advancements and promotions and just kind of do, coast until I figure out what I'm going to do. That's when I got my training as an energy healer and somatic counselor and, learn meditation.
Which is really an important piece. So I think is that you have the awareness of like, is this really what I'm meant to do? Is this it? And by the way, I just also wanted to circle back, because often like you think like, once I get this PhD, once I get this tenure, like then I'll be happy, right? And there's like the illusion, right? Like everyone would look at Christina and be like, she's beautiful. She's living in these exotic countries. She's going to be a published author. She, people just sit and wrap attention to her. Yeah, like she's dating, you know what I mean? And so I know that it's hard for people because you have this illusion of like that when I get this accomplishment, then I'll be happy. And so was it hard for you after the trauma? Like, did you second guess yourself? Were you like, well, maybe that was just me in a moment of like panic and fear? Like, am I happy? Am I being greedy? Like, because I know a lot of clients like have had all those thoughts. So did any of that cross your mind?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it wasn't so much about like, am I being greedy? But like, is this real? Is this really right? Because I started getting those spiritual downloads, right? And I was kind of crafting my own spiritual path, like as many of us new agers do, right? Kind of like from different like, spiritual traditions and paths. And yeah, so it took a long while for me to actually trust what was coming from inside versus like what my head would have been telling me or anyone else telling me, like, this is crazy to walk away from something so stable. But meanwhile, I was like expanding my circle of like my people, other people who were more like my authentic self. And the feedback I was getting from them is like, no, you have to leave. Like, what do you do? What are you even doing? You have to walk towards, you're going to be supported in this path if this really is your path in life. So I did. And actually, after the trauma, it was like 2 or 3 more years before I'd finished my book and got it published and got tenure. So there was like, this kind of thought. I even like played around with like starting ideas for a second book idea, because right after you get tenure, just think of the second book.
Right.
I just couldn't latch on to any of them. Like my heart wasn't in it. But I did have this amazing opportunity at my university. They had like a new play development series, and I had an opportunity to actually get creative, because that's a big part of me too. I'm also a writer. And so I had this opportunity to develop a new play, which was actually based on my trauma and my working spiritual path and an incident of medical trauma that my dad had in Costa Rica. was able to sort of put all these together, into like a fictional version of my life. And that was so healing. And, I got staged readings at my university. So there were moments when I, especially like towards the end of my time there, I could bring in more of my authentic self. Like I started giving meditation classes, quarterly meditation classes at the Women's Center on campus, and sharing my story and sharing different mindfulness techniques and meditation. So I became more of myself. I would even sometimes do meditation in the classroom, and the kids were just like, now I think it's more common, right? But, a few years ago, it was like, wait, we're going to just stop and just be quiet for a minute before class.
That's so amazing. I didn't even know that was more common now, but damn, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So the whole journey so far, really, like if we think about what you shared, it's like it allowed you to focus in on the parts of yourself that weren't being expressed. And you said, was this my life, or was this a life designed by my dad?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Familiar question to many of us. This would be dad, any kind of early caregiver, right? Grandparent.
Yes.
Mom, like whoever it is that influenced you, coach, teacher, whose life am I really living? And my dad was in the Peace Corps. He was in one of the first groups to go over the Peace Corps in the 60s. When JFK first created the Peace Corps. Oh my gosh,
that's amazing.
I know. And so I grew up hearing those stories. It was like really glorified. So my older sister and I both did the Peace Corps. That's where I went to the Cape Verde Islands in the first place. And then also he just had this big focus on achievement. That's clearly what he values, and I think I am like naturally more of a relational kind of person, but the way to grab his attention when I was growing up was to achieve or
yes.
well.
We get the cookie. Right? We're like, wait, I'm getting love and attention. I'll do it again. We're like the rat with the cheese.
Absolutely. And one of my mentors in healing school put it a good way. He said, if you feel like you're not getting love, like the unconditional love, you're going to go for the second best thing, which is approval, right? Which is like, that's kind of, and it was like, no matter what I did in my career, like I always like wanted to share it with him and like get his reaction. And it took a long time to really kind of move away from that, right? And to become who I am. And I feel like meeting Darren was such a pivotal moment because he was so different. He was not so much about achievement, right? And he could really and he's a therapist, and that was a midlife transition for him too. His first career was in graphic design. He had a first marriage, first career. So then he was in this moment of transition and coming into himself. And what we were both really interested in was spirituality, personal growth, evolution. So it was this feeling, and talk about somatics, I really knew that in my body. When I met him, my heart just lit up and I was like, no, this actually feels right. And the same thing on my career path, the more I moved into it, when I had that heart kind of lighting up feeling, and even that sigh you just did, like the body's kind of relaxation, and, integration. So, and that's when that kind of all came together after I met him. I was like, oh, I'm going to be a somatic counselor who works with people on love. That was sort of the final piece. My video editor jokes with me because I always say, I love this. And he made a what do you call those things? A funny reel? That's awesome. Outtakes reel of me just going, I love that. I love that. I love that, Christina. If you guys you can play a drinking game, listening to Life Check Yourself, drink every time Marni says, I love that. But I do. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about somatics, because in my own journey, my worst, best thing that happened to me was, I got divorced and then I met this guy. And if you haven't listened to that episode yet, ladies, I ended up becoming friends with his ex-wife, and she became a coach, and I just interviewed her. Oh my gosh.
I know. So crazy.
I did hear that story.
Yeah.
I knew your story. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. But she was the one who sort of said, you deserve better than this guy. I know he's a jerk. Even though he's the father of my kids, but you deserve better. I don't even know you, but go do this somatic work. And so I went and I did that. And I didn't know what somatics were. And one of the things that I've tried to integrate in my work is this idea that your body has to process the trauma wholly, not just like, because I think a lot of therapy, and I love therapy and I think it's really important. And in some cases, so need to do that before you work with me or maybe even someone like Christina. But if we just go like, oh, my dad wanted me to be a blah, blah, blah. I get it. You still go out in the world with that knowledge and you don't really do anything differently. So hold on one second. We need to edit just 1 second. Oh, he just left. My assistant somehow is on the line and keeps coming back.
Okay. No worries.
That's okay. I don't want it to mess up the audio.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so hopefully he got that. I don't know how to. Okay. It's not my area of expertise. Okay. So go ahead. I don't know if you want to respond to that.
Yes, I do. Because a lot of clients come to me saying like, are you sure this is going to work? Because I already know my patterns. I've worked this in therapy for many years. And I was like, I did too. But until like that transformation happens through the body, transformation kind of doesn't happen on your love path, So this is, one of our core learnings in my healing school. I went to the Lionheart Institute of Energy Healing in LA, and it was really like every pattern we have, first of all, it helped us survive. So we call them survival patterns, right? Helped us survive those early traumas, right? Small T traumas, big T traumas, like whatever patterns we developed. So we have to love the hell out of them for that reason, right? Because they were our friends in that moment. Yeah. And then we get to this point, right, when we're ready to outgrow them. We're ready to move on and take on more life-affirming, supportive patterns. And so what we want to do to heal those originary patterns is like notice in the body, because each of those patterns has, an emotional pattern behind it. It usually has a story, a recurring thought pattern, and it has a sensation in the body. And then if you go into the sensation usually has some kind of impression of like a color or a shape, right? Or a texture. And so that is the somatic healing journey. You are tracking sensations in your body as you're making those connections between the past and the present. What's coming up for me now? Why was this disappointment with dating or career like so incredibly triggering? Well, it's touching on something very raw, from when you were young. So if you're making those connections through the sensation in your body, like when I ask my clients is like, we start with the present trigger. Right, the pain point. Okay. And then we kind of talk through it. And then it's like, where are you feeling this in your body? And I help them get in relationship with that pain in their body. And this is how people working with me as well. Right. So maybe that's tightness in the chest, or like I was saying, like, tightness in the jaw. And then you go inside and you kind of breathe into that area of the body. You get curious about it. What does it look like? What does it feel like? And then the golden question is, does this sensation feel familiar? Right. What is the earliest age you can remember feeling it? And that's when like this light bulb moment comes up. And, my teacher, Laura Fine at Lionheart, used to call it this moment of like spontaneous combustion as you're working with the energy, where the energy already starts to transmute. And sometimes that looks like, it feels like the sensation is moving from like maybe the chest to the stomach. It starts by just sort of moving around, or maybe there's more space. And then you follow that shift. Well, what's it like to feel more space? And then I find, just in doing this work on myself, and, I still work with a somatic therapist, it's like when the emotion changes, that's when the energy in the body changes. Like if I go in with like a lot of anger, if I'm working with a client who has a lot of anger, and we're like tracing that anger, that, that pattern back to an earlier moment, when it shifts to sadness, it's like that's when things start to change, because the anger has been protecting that sadness that did not want to be felt. And that's what needed to be felt and healed. Okay. So this would be a life check yourself moment, because so many people need to hear that that underneath your anger probably is sadness. And I think that we go to such great lengths to bury our sadness because we feel like we don't want to deal with that. And anger is like more acceptable. I just wrote on Facebook today about how we're so much more comfortable arguing for our limitations and why we're right about what's wrong. So true.
Right?
Yes.
And so we're
Very
like,
self-righteous about
fuck
that.
this, fuck that, you know, da da da, and this is,
Right.
and then underneath there's just this sadness, right? And so, but the sadness is, like you said, it's the golden nugget. Like we have to get there and be with that. So how do you encourage listeners to turn toward that? Because I think most people would say, I can't deal with that. I don't have time for that. If I do, mine was like, if I do that, I will literally end up in a puddle on the floor and I will never get up again. So what do you say to people who are like, Christina, I got no time for sad. I just anger and move on.
Right. That's such a beautiful, beautiful question. Right. Because the anchor can be very motivating. Right. And we don't really want to make that wrong because we need those really like powerful emotions to get forward in life sometimes and move through difficult times. But I guess like if you don't make time for that sadness in the long term, you are going to hold yourself up. So it's like a short term time investment versus carrying it around underneath and having that unhealed sadness influence every decision you make on your path, whether that's to love or your career path. You know, people trying to follow the law of attraction, right? And it's like, no, I just want to like think positively, right? But if you have these unresolved emotions underneath, that actually gets in the way of that flow of positive energy that makes the law of attraction work, right? So actually slowing down and being what's underneath, it's like slowing down to then speed up, right? So it's like that sadness. And the other thing is, you know, I work my own coach, Kate Northrup, who does a lot of nervous system work, a lot of body work. She's always like reminding us that if you are actually with an emotion skillfully, it takes about 90 seconds for that to shift.
Right.
90 seconds, right? But it's just being with it. And it's like staying out of the story. Like when I work with people, it's like you got to drop below the story, like those thoughts that are telling you a story about that emotion, which could be like, I don't want to be in a puddle, or this is going to hold me back, right? You drop below that and you actually just stay with the sadness in an embodied way. It will shift even if it's not 90 seconds, if you're really like mindful, and I always say bring a compassionate gaze to it.
Yeah.
You know, and you stay with it, it is really going to shift. Like energy is always changing, right? It cannot be created or destroyed. That's another thing I learned. Like it's always changing. So we want to just be with it as it's changing and transmuting. We want to help it and give it the space to change, right? And then the sadness can transform back into life force energy, which is what you actually need to help you move forward.
Well, right. Because if you go with this whole idea that we are energy, right? There's just an energy of sadness, right? And this whole somatic body of work is just taking that energy and noticing it in our body, working with it in our body, releasing it out of our body, right? To create space. And I think this is really an interesting thing that you said about people who are like, I'm doing the law of attraction. It's not working, right? Like I had a client doing this the other day. Like I'm meditating, I'm journaling, you know, like I'm doing the thing and I just keep hitting roadblocks. So why isn't it working? Yeah. So what do you say when someone's like, it's not working. I'm doing all this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a hard one. Like, so I always start with validation and compassion because look, I was there. You know, it took me years. Yeah, exactly. Like no one becomes a love coach who had an easy path to love.
And if they did, don't hire them because they don't know shit. Yeah, if they're 22, nothing against all y'all out there, but like, okay, go ahead.
You have to have this sort of rocky path. Yeah,
so
absolutely. So I get it because I was doing all that stuff too, right? And it is genuinely frustrating when it feels like, okay, it's working for other people. Why isn't it working for me? And this is where I feel like it's a moment to acknowledge the pain that might be underneath that urgency. Because in that client you just described, there's like urgency there. There's like, it must work. Well, why isn't it working, right? And if you don't like heal what's underneath that urgency, it's going to just stop you and get in the way of those practices.
Profound.
You know, like every time. So I have like two things that I might say to that client. And one is like, I got this from Pam Grout. Did you read her stuff? Like E squared, EQ.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I'm like, did I?
Yeah, she's so hilarious. And in EQ'd, which is a follow-up to E squared, she talks about all these people writing in who kind of had that same messaging or tone. Like, it's not working. I've done all your experiments. She said, it almost sounded a little bit feral. And she's like, The idea is to get in the quantum sandbox and like have fun with this. Like that's how law of attraction actually works. So we look at it as an experiment. But I don't think you can do that until you've actually, like I said, cleared what's underneath. So the other reframe I would have for sadness is like, I usually say, I like not to play favorites among my emotions, but I've learned like to love all the emotions. But sadness, of all like the challenging emotions, that would be my favorite because it's very heart opening. Like anxiety, it's such a tough one. I don't know, did you see Inside Out 2 yet?
I haven't seen it. I have to watch that. Yes, I want to.
I'm sure a lot of your listeners have.
Yes.
But the way they show anxiety just taking control of the control panel in this little girl's mind, there's no space for any other emotions, right? And that's not our fault. Like a lot of us are running that anxious pattern. I know I still do, right? But if you can actually work with that skillfully and get to the sadness underneath, or work with that anger and get to the sadness underneath, it is actually very heart opening. Like when we're actually sad, like when you're talking about grieving, for your dad, like you were in your heart, and sometimes like grieving from a breakup or grieving from the loss of a career path. I do believe we have to grieve.
Yeah.
When we're making these changes, but it lands you in your heart, and our hearts are very magnetic. Like in the Heart Math Institute, they say like our heart's electromagnetic field is actually 5,000 times greater than the electromagnetic field around our brains, right? So it's like,
yes,
getting in your heart from the sadness can actually open you up to more love, to more goodness, to more self-love. And that makes you magnetic, right? That's what makes the law of attraction work.
Exactly. I mean, and that's why in the end, I ended up having my brand be the Institute for Living Courageously, because it takes courage, but I have really been saying to myself and to others, like, wow, I can do hard stuff. I can do hard stuff. We can, because we are resilient. It's making the choice, right, to say, if I can be brave for 90 seconds.
Yes.
Like, we can 90 seconds. Like, am I willing to try it? At the appropriate time, of course. But that's really turning toward what you've been trying to push away.
Yes. And I love that you mentioned the 90 seconds again, because take it small, like one small step in that direction. We don't have to overwhelm our nervous systems by doing too much.
So let's talk about the nervous system. And it's funny, someone said, I read the other day, we're in a trust recession. I love that
Interesting.
term.
Yeah,
right.
I want to hear more about that. Like, what do they mean by that? Like,
they were talking about it in the coaching industry as a whole. But when I read that generally, I was like, I think people aren't trusting themselves. They're not trusting their intuition. They're not trusting culture. They're not trusting, right. We're being conditioned, like, Instagram isn't real, like this person is sort of like out to get you, like you can't trust anyone. And I was thinking, like, without, like, we have to trust ourselves, right? And so we can't trust other people until we trust ourselves. We can't trust anything until we have a way to trust ourselves. And I wanted to point that out because what you said was using that internal, I call it resonance of like, somatically, like this, I feel this feels right. So what's a step someone can take or a question they can ask themselves or journal on that is like, how can I start to recognize that I do have this capacity? Because some people will say, I can't feel anything. I'm not feely. I don't know. Like, I'm not good at it, whatever. What's a good first step?
I love that. Well, I love your idea of journaling. I'm a big fan of that because, like, the truth is, like, my husband puts it this way, like, we have a lot of old code inside of us that we need to replace, right? And that takes time. It can't just be like a moment of like, oh, I trusted my intuition. That felt good. The old code could keep coming back. So we want to like recode, right? And so I'm a big fan of like two things, savoring and journaling. So savoring, which is like coming out of Rick Hanson's book about, hardwiring happiness, like what do you do with the positive emotions when they do come in? The longer you can devote like 90 seconds to them, 2 minutes to it, like a moment of like, whoa, I just like had this feeling on the inside that I should like turned down this like maybe offer in my career that on the outside would have looked so juicy, right? But on the inside, it was like, no, that's going to be too much for me. It's going to overwhelm me. It's not going to be a good use of my time. It's going to drain my energy. But when I listened to that, I had like a sigh of relief. It felt good, you know, and then sit with that. Like just let that feeling anchor, close your eyes, feel it in your body. 90 seconds, like 2 minutes, because that's how we actually hardwire, you know, that intuition, like bring in that new code. And if you do this over and over and over again, you will change those neural pathways in your brain. You know, he says that in that book, and Hardwiring Happiness. So savoring is a big thing. And then also I'm a big fan of just like keeping track of it on your phone, like in the notes document, like, yeah, you could have like an intuition journal, like I listened to my gut that time and it felt really good. And then like, if there's some kind of positive benefit that came from that, like, oh, I said no to that opportunity and something even better came in that was more in alignment and worked better with my body and my nervous system, that can go in the journal too. Like I followed my intuition and this amazing thing happened, right? Because we need to like really mark it in our minds and our bodies to rewrite that old code, right? So if you have like a growing list of like, all these times I listened to my body and it turned out great, you know, it turned out fine, then you can go back and look at that, you know, in moments of doubt, like, okay, here's 10 different times when I knew I could trust my body, and then like savor that feeling. So it takes some intentionality, I think, to rewire, you know, those pathways and to like rewrite that code. But it's like small, like micro shifts at a time.
I love this. And I'm going to circle back to that client that I mentioned, because it really speaks to what you were talking about, is that when she was pushing, you know, for all these things and felt like they weren't working out, she was so focused on what she thought it was supposed to look like that she wasn't listening. She wasn't having the stillness. She wasn't being in the intuition. She was just like here going like, well, this is what I think it's supposed to look like. This is what I want. And that happens in dating all the time, right? Like this guy, this, you know, app, this time, right? And then we're just push. And so there's this softening that really came through in your examples of like savoring, right? And listening and recognizing that resonance that can be your guide. I almost do this now. Like my husband will sometimes roll his eyes because he'll be like, just make a decision. I'm like, I feel like there's something easy that's just going to happen or come in. And so like, I just have to wait for it because,
I love that.
Right? Because I'm like, this is feeling hard. It's just going to be easy when it happens the right way. It's going to flow. And so that's a cultivated somatic knowing.
Yes.
Right? That is there for all of us, I believe, but we have to learn. We have to slow it down to start learning that new skill. So I love savoring.
Yes. And I imagine, Marni, like the first time you tried to do that, it might not have felt comfortable or right. Right? Because like,
well, it's scary.
It is.
I mean, right? It's just like
familiar. Yes.
Yeah. Like what? Well, I need to make a decision. No. What's it going to be? What's the best thing? Oh, and then consensus building. What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? What should I do? Should I do this? Should I do that?
Yeah.
Because I'm just like out here, you know, following.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And then like when you listen to that sort of gravitational pull inside you, you know, like once you do that and you get like the good stuff, you know, then it's more like reassurance. It builds a different kind of trust, you know, in yourself. Yeah. So I love that story. And I love that you like give yourself time. Like I once pulled a tarot card that said like, if no decision feels right to you at the time, then just don't make a decision right now. It's not, all decisions must be made in their own time, right?
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. So I'm going to say this last thing before we go. So do you ever watch The Crown?
No, I've heard a lot about it. But
I'm married to a British man, so I just started watching a lot of like royal stuff. He could care less, but I learned something really interesting. I don't even know if it's true, but I think it might be because it was in the show. But then again, who knows? But the Queen said, this is Queen Elizabeth, about making decisions. She said they always took it through these 3 things. And it was number 1, does it need to happen now?
Nice.
Number 2, do I need to be the one to do it? And number 3 is, does it need to happen at all?
I love that. Yeah.
Right. And I think that we forget that there are other options.
Right. Right.
And it's like you could just create a little space and listen to your body, go within. All those deadlines are self-imposed 99% of the time.
Exactly. And what I like about that structure is it starts with the easier one. Like, do I need to make this now? Because if you have this compulsion, like I have to do it now, it just puts a little question mark in there, a lot of little space. You're not putting all this pressure to like, do I need to do this or not? But it's like, do I need to make this decision now? Right? It's just like a little bit of space comes in, and then you can go on to the other 2. Can I delegate this? Like, or just can someone else do this? And then like, oh, maybe at the point, by that point, you're ready to like make the call and like, do I need to do it or not? So yeah, look what we get from, the Crown.
From the Crown. Well, I think about this because I want to talk about your dating guide that you have, your free dating mastery toolkit, because I think about this in terms of like text message response.
Yeah.
And if you're in a relationship, like, and you're mad at your partner, or you want to send that message, or you get an email from someone at work, right? We're like filled with all the anger, all this, and you're like, la, 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 and it's like, okay, wait, do I need to answer now? Do I need to be the one to deal with this? Do I need to do it at all? So anyway, I think it's a little.
And here's another little tool that help in those moments. My husband calls this urge surfing. Who works with like addicts, right? So he teaches them, like, when you have an urge to use, right? It's like you surf the urge, you stay with it. You stay with it and you stay with it. And a lot of times it'll just work itself out. And that works for the same thing. When you feel like a lot of anger, do I like send this angry text or send an angry email? Just like surf the urge, like really like feel that anger. Let it really fill up, and see like it's just a wave that will probably pass. And then you can decide like, okay, do I still want to send the email? But then your tone's going to be different. If you actually do, you'll be responding, rather than reacting. So yeah, great example.
I love that. Well, ladies, you want to go in the show notes and you want to go to Christina's McMahon. I'm just said it like that because it's MCMAHON.com. It's all in the show notes. And for all my ladies who are dating, she has this free guide that is a step-by-step guide to calling in your sacred partner. So you want to check that out. You want to follow her. Where can they follow you? Are you doing the social stuff?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at CS_McMahon, MCMAHON. I'm also on Facebook on Christina Sean McMahon. And you can also find me on Insight Timer. I'm on the Insight Timer meditation app and the Aura meditation apps. And yeah, the dating guide, there's also like a love breakthrough meditation that's in the dating mastery toolkit. So like, different ways to get into the body, get into your intuition, so that like, that's what's leading you forward on your path.
I love this. And for those of you who are in that midlife career thing, like, like it is a huge inspiration, Christina, about listening to that discontent and figuring out a way to follow it without blowing up your life. Because ultimately you're living your mission, you're using all your talents and gifts, you're making an impact. So I just want to honor you for your bravery and your courage and in creating that and impacting Gemma so much that she was like, you need to meet her, and all the legacy that you did create as a tenured professor. Like, what a huge impact you've made on the world. So thank you for sharing it with my audience.
I just have to say likewise. And Gemma said, by the way, said the same thing about you. Like, you have to talk to Marni. Like, she's like, this is a direct quote. She's like, she's such a badass. She just like, goes after what she wants. And like, she totally changed her life. And so like, you really have been modeling that, I feel like, for your listeners and inviting guests on to talk about this. Like, we need this in the world right now. So thank you for modeling it too, Marni.
Thank you. Because as one of my clients said, midlife is no joke.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. All right, ladies. Okay. So I also was a teacher. So you can imagine both of us standing up at the top of the classroom being like, okay, class, we learned a lot today. Review your notes. Pick one thing. Share something that you learned today with someone else that'll help you anchor it and learn it. So that's how you can take it in. That's how you can begin to life check yourself. And of course, if you know someone who's stuck, someone who's like so up in their head, share this episode with them. It's the most kind and gentle way to kick someone's ass without being annoying. And you can find me on Instagram. It's Marni Battista _. And I have a new quiz. So if you're interested in figuring out your personality type, and if it's helping you unlock your dream or hindering you, you might want to go to decodeyourdestinyquiz.com because that's brand new. Again, Christina, thank you for being here. And to the rest of you, don't forget, it's always time to life check yourself. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now.
Thanks for tuning into today's show. Do you ever wake up feeling like you've already run a marathon before the day even begins? Does your coffee need a coffee just to get through the morning? Well, I feel you, and I've been there. Burnout isn't just a buzzword. It's a reality for far too many of us, especially as we navigate life over 40. But here's the good news. You don't have to accept feeling perpetually drained as your new normal. I'm excited to introduce my new flagship, Live Life on Your Terms program. This isn't just another Band-Aid fix or a fluffy self-care promise. This is about real transformation. We're diving deep to tackle the root cause of your burnout, regulate your nervous system, lower your cortisol and adrenaline, and rewire your neural pathways to transform how you feel in your life from the inside out. Imagine this, waking up energized, not by caffeine, but by excitement and passion for the day ahead. Picture yourself managing stress with grace and finding joy in moments big and small. That's not just a dream or a someday. It's within your reach now. So, if you like what you've heard and you're interested in seeing if you're a fit for working together, here's what I want you to do next. Email me at vip@datingwithdignity.com. Don't wait for one day. Make today your day one so we can create your next chapter. I'm Marni, and I'll talk to you soon.